Hi, this is Laura Holyoke. I have a recording for you that overviews the cultural lens. One of the most easiest ways to understand understand how hard it may be to change culture is that culture to an organization is equal to a personality of an individual. So if you want to go out and change a personality, think how hard that might be. And then you can look at the literature and wonder why there's so much on changing culture of an organization. So one of the ways to see culture is to think about our families and specifically what kind of traditions that we have in our families. It tends to endure like a personality. So some cultures and families looks like this. How we spend our holidays, how birthdays are handled. Does everybody get together first thing in the morning? Is there cake? Are there candles? Is the tradition to do something different, a special dinner? Also, during holidays, how just maybe Christmas is handled, how Easter is handled, shows us culture in families. Also communication, how much we talk and how often we talk to one another is part of culture in our families. And then also how we treat one another. So hugs and kisses, showing of affection is part of our culture. So I often explain it that we grow up in families and we're very used to our culture in our family. And then when we meet somebody, a best friend, a partner, we always think that our lives, our families, are normal. However, their families are a little bit weird because they do things different. So culture here is made up of norms, what it is that we do on a day-to-day basis that governs the behavior of members in an organization and in families. And then norms end up being a bit like rules, only they're much less explicit, oftentimes not written anywhere. One of my favorite stories and ways to talk about culture is to talk about this cage that this ape is in. So I'm going to read it to you, and it's also available on our BB Learn site. Start with a cage containing 5 apes. In the cage, hang a banana on a string and put stairs under it. Before long, an ape will go to the stairs and start to climb towards the banana. As soon as he touches the stairs, spray all the apes with cold water. After a while, another ape makes the attempt. With the same result, all the apes are sprayed with cold water. Turn off the cold water. If, later, another ape tries to climb the stairs, the other apes will try to prevent it, even though no water sprays on them. Now remove one ape from the cage and replace it with a new one. The new ape sees the banana, wants to climb the stairs. To his horror, all the other apes attack him. After another attempt and attack, he knows that if he tries to climb the stairs, he will be assaulted. Next, remove another of the original 5 apes and replace it with a new one. The newcomer goes to the stairs and is attacked. The previous newcomer takes part in the punishment with enthusiasm. Again, replace a third original ape with a new one. The new one makes it to the stairs and is attacked as well. 2 of the 4 apes that beat him have no idea why they were not permitted to climb the stairs, or why they are participating in the beating of the newest ape. After replacing the 4th and 5th original apes, all the apes which have been sprayed with cold water have been replaced. Nevertheless, no ape ever again approaches the stairs. Why not? Because that's the way it's always been around here. Sound familiar? Because that is culture in an organization. We often, when we go into a new organization or take a new job, we want to know really what that culture is. However, we don't really learn that culture until we've been in that organization. So research tells us that it takes anywhere from 6 months to a year and a half to really understand the culture. It usually slaps us in the face day in and day out for quite some time when we enter it. And then we know that we understand it when we can no longer explain our behavior, perhaps because we're living off of and carrying forward assumptions that we've learned by being in that organization. So culture tends to influence what skills we acquire and what we think about in organizations. And you can think of, as we go through these lists, you can always think of an organization as a place of work. You can also think of an organization as a family unit. Culture also influences how we acquire information and skills, how we do that. It influences when we are allowed to participate in certain activities and who is allowed to participate in those activities. It is socially constructed. That is, culture reflects meanings that are constitution and interaction and that form commonly accepted definitions of the situation. Again, in organizations, we usually don't know what these are when we first start into a family or an organization, and then before long, we are enculturating others around us. So organizational culture starts with the leadership. It's reinforced. Let me read this. Let me start with the skin. It starts with leadership and is reinforced with the accumulated learning of the organizational members. And it is a powerful, albeit often implicit, set of forces that determine human behavior within the organization or within the family unit. Organizational culture goes deeper than the words used in a mission statement. And organizational culture is the web of tacit understandings, boundaries, common language, and shared expectations maintained over time by the members of that organization. Organizational research scholars say that if we can understand the culture, we can understand the organization. That culture tends to explain the incomprehensible and irrational that we see from the outside of the organization. Any organization with history has a culture, and culture is a phenomenon that surrounds all of us. As the accumulated shared learning from shared history, it implies structural stability because of its history, because remember, if you look back on the structure lens, that's been there for a while. So structural stability and patterning and integration. However, not every group develops a culture, which talks a little bit to the Tuckman's, it gets together in forms, but actually to getting to norming and performing, that's when it usually develops a culture. So culture defines what it is that we pay attention to, what actions that we take and when we take those actions, what those things mean, and how we act, or react, I should say, emotionally. Don't know if you can read this cartoon in the lower right-hand corner. Two guys have these really weird hats on, and one of them says, "I don't know how it started either. All I know is that it's part of our corporate culture." So a few concepts about culture: that it's equal to the behavior that we carry out. It's learned. In fact, it doesn't come to us automatically. And it's learned through our interactions with others. So I've seen something written that this culture eats strategy for breakfast. Some people say culture eats strategy for lunch. I'm not exactly for sure which author to attribute it to. However, here's the idea behind it. We can have the very best strategy for a business, for carrying out an initiative. However, if the culture of the organization does not support it, that strategy will go nowhere. I'm going to talk a few minutes of sometimes the father of organizational culture is known as Edgar Schein. And Schein points out that there are 3 levels of culture. The first level are artifacts. The second level are espoused values. And the third, basic assumptions. So artifacts are those things that we can see. They're tangible, observable. They may be written documents, a physical layout, how people dress, behavioral rituals. You may come into my office and see how I have my office set up, what kind of pictures I have on my walls. You may hear me interact with others in my building. So artifacts are really easy to see. However, they're very hard to decipher. For example, if you're arriving at my office to come have a meeting with me and somebody's leaving and says, okay, thank you very much, Dr. Holyoke, I'll talk to you next week. You don't know if that person is making a joke by calling me Dr. Holyoke. You don't know if I demand that everybody who comes into my office call me Dr. Holyoke. You just don't know until you get to know me well enough. Espoused values are those values or beliefs that we think should happen in the organization. So espoused means values that we say we're going to do. Sometimes a little bit different than the values in use. So examples of espoused values also include strategies, goals, and the philosophy of an organization. Sometimes they are espoused justifications, and again, don't always line up with what we do doesn't always line up with what we say we're going to do. Finally, what's really hard to get to, very hard to see and understand, are the basic assumptions. These end up being the taken for granted ways that we do things in an organization, how we think, and how we go about achieving goals. Very unconscious. It's hard for most people to really see this and connect with it. If you equate that to an iceberg, shines levels of organizational culture, it looks like this. Or like this, if you look at artifacts on top, which includes the language, norms, roles, authority structures. Artifacts are also part of the structure of an organization. Whereas the values are some rituals and ceremonies, myths that get carried on, the cage with the apes, socialization processes, what we say we value. And then finally, assumptions are so far underneath the iceberg that we often don't see these in order to question them, the beliefs or assumptions, worldview of organizations. So I'm going to jump back out of Shine, and I'm going to jump back into them in a minute, kind of. I wanted to point out to you the work of Joanne Martin, and she's published a couple of books, but they're perspectives on cultures and organizations, and she says that there are really three different kinds. There's an integrated culture, a differentiated, and then a fragmented culture. So integrated means that the culture, the goals that are set out in an organization are described as common and shared. Everybody across the organization knows them, understands them. The differentiation perspective recognizes the inconsistencies. So there's not an absence of culture. It's just one culture among several. It could generate competing visions, loyalties, or even subcultures in an organization. However, Martin says that fragmentation is the most common scenario she sees, and it looks like confusion and ambiguity over the organization's core values and essential premises. So people in the organization have an inability to articulate a coherent vision over values and goals. And it may be due to the contradictions and paradoxes of organizational life, bureaucracies. So they're difficult to see. Why are cultures so difficult to see? It's equal to the idea that fish don't notice water because it's all around them. So if structure is the hard controls, culture is the soft controls within an organization. So I want to take a minute and just show you this slide. I want you to take some time to read it and then think about how it relates to culture. I want to, because I'm running out of time, show you this infrastructure so you can see cultural, how deep the culture is. And we talked about changing of structure is at the top, so it's very easy to change the physical structure, harder to change the infrastructure, and then we get down to behavioral and cultural, long-term, and is most difficult. I'm going to end this here because I have a few more slides that I will include in our next recording. Thank you.